Blessings and welcome to today's Law Enforcement Daily Devotional. I can't tell you how excited I am to get into today's lesson because it allows us as law enforcement officers to use our investigative skills, and that is one of the coolest things about us doing this one-year Bible read and daily devotionals. So I hope you have read ahead. I hope you read yesterday's lesson because I think you're going to really enjoy this. So we're going to get right into it. Today's read was 2 Samuel chapters 18 and 19. And I want to jump to 19 and talk about the story of Mephibosheth. Mephibosheth was Jonathan's son who was crippled. And when David defeated Saul, he made a promise that he would take care of anybody that was left over in Saul's family, show kindness to him. And Mephibosheth seemed to be the only relative that was left alive that David could show this kindness to. So David brings him into his home. David feeds him from his own table every day. He treats him like royalty. And he really loves Jonathan's son. Of course, David and Jonathan were best friends. So anyway, trying to rush through this so I don't go over 5 minutes. But so yesterday we read about David fleeing Jerusalem. He's trying to get away from Absol, Absalom, if I can say this right, Absalom, who is David's son, who has just pulled off a successful coup and is taken over. So David's fleeing the city. But as David's fleeing, um, Ziba, who is Mephibosheth's servant, Ziba is Mephibosheth's servant, remember that, comes out and meets David. We're going to come back to that. But in today's read, in chapter 19, verses 24 and 26, this is what it says. Then Mephibosheth, the son of Saul, came down. Now it says the son of Saul, but remember he's Jonathan's son. Saul would have been his grandfather, but it calls him the son of Saul. Came down to meet the king, and he had neither cared for his feet or trimmed his mustache or washed his clothes from the day the king departed until he came home in peace. Now this is important because Mephibosheth is putting on a public display, which was very dangerous, but he's putting on a public display in support of King David, who's been kicked out of Jerusalem. Um, so this is very telling for David, and this will come back. Verse 25, it was when he came from Jerusalem to meet the king said to him, why did you not go with me, Mephibosheth? So he answered, O my lord the king, my servant deceived me, for your servant said, I will saddle a donkey for myself, that I may ride on it and go with the king, because your servant is lame. So Mephibosheth's servant Ziba saddled up a donkey for him and saddled up a donkey for Mephibosheth and Ziba so they could go with the king. But Mephibosheth is saying he deceived him. He saddled up the donkeys, but then he just took off with them like a carjacking. Um, Now David's a little curious because he had heard a story just a couple of days earlier from Ziba when Ziba came out to join him. And let's go back to that. That's out of First Samuel or Second Samuel, and it is chapter 16, verses 1 through 4. Now, when David passed a little beyond the summit, and remember David's on the run out of Jerusalem, behold, Ziba, the servant of Mephibosheth, met him with a couple of saddled donkeys, and on them were 200 loaves of bread, 100 clusters of raisins, 100 summer fruits, and a jug of wine. The king said to Ziba, why do you have these? And Ziba said, the donkeys are for the king's household to ride, and the bread of summer and the bread and the fruit of summer are for the young men to eat, and the wine for whoever is faint in the wilderness to drink. Then the king said, where is your master's son? And Ziba said to the king, behold, he is staying in Jerusalem, for he said, today the house of Israel will be restored to the king of my father, and it will be restored to me. So the king said to Ziba, behold, all that belongs to Mephibosheth is yours. And Ziba said, I prostrate myself. Let me find favor in your sight. So basically, Ziba comes to David, gives him this lie or this story, and David buys into it and says, well, I'll just take all his property and give it to you. So we have this theft by deception, which a cop would normally investigate. So as David looks at these two things and listens to the two stories, he sees the two saddled donkeys, but only one rider that Ziba brings down. Mephibosheth confirms, yeah, he saddled two donkeys, but one was supposed to be for me, but then he carjacked me and left. Plus, there's the fact of the outward appearance of the public support for David. So David knows which one's telling the truth. But David goes one step further, and if that wasn't cool enough, check this out. Um, in verse 29, David says, I'll just divide the property. You can have half of it, and you can have half of it, and we'll be done with it. And Mephibosheth says, and this is a quote, let him even take it all, since the Lord my king has come to his own house safely. So Mephibosheth says, now you go ahead and just let him have it. What does that remind you of? Hopefully, it reminds you out of a story out of 1 Kings chapter 3, verse 16 through 28, where Solomon, who was the wisest man ever on the earth besides Christ, who is also David's son, this is the example that demonstrates the greatest part of his wisdom. But he may not have come up with this on his own. We see now in 2 Samuel that he may have learned this lesson or heard about his father David doing the very thing with this property between these two servants. Really cool story. It shows us why being a cop and being able to investigate some of the stories in the Bible is so much fun. So anyway, I hope you read it. I hope you got as much out of it as I did, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. And God bless you and be safe.